Now, embattled Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam is expected to announce a ban on wearing face masks at public gatherings. Officials plan to use colonial-era legislation to introduce these measures aimed at putting down the anti-government protests. The legislation, called the Emergency Regulations Ordinance, has not been used for over 50 years. Now, Hong Kong's anti-government demonstrators clashed with police into the early hours of this morning, venting their anger over a policeman's shooting and wounding of a teenager earlier in the week. Activists went on the rampage in districts across the Chinese-ruled city late into the night, hurling petrol bombs, setting fires and blocking roads as police fired tear gas to disperse them. Right, now to get a further analysis of what's happening in Hong Kong and in China at the moment, we're joined now by somebody who understands China and is pretty much an expert on it, Professor Paul Zilungisele Tembe, who's a senior researcher from the Thabo Mbeki African Leadership Institute. Prof, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program. So these demonstrations in Hong Kong began in June, and it was about the extradition of suspects to mainland China, something that the people in Hong Kong didn't want. The bill was withdrawn last month. Why are there still protests happening in Hong Kong?
Yes, thank you for having me, and good afternoon to all the viewers. What is happening at the moment? Anything could have triggered these demonstrations. These have become perennial demonstrations between the month of June and July. But this is the first time that we see them lasting this long. So we can link two paradigms into this. One occasion, it is the 70th anniversary of People's Republic of China. On the other aspect, let us also connect it to the larger mentality that is happening from the US, which manifests itself in the form of trade war. So the young people in Hong Kong, they have this imagined democracy, which in my sense is a double standard democracy, because during the time of Britain in Hong Kong, there was no democracy. The Hong Kongese were under British. It was a ruthless rule. So this democracy, this imagined democracy, is what is leading the youth astray. That is why you find even divisions that elder generation are not getting involved in the demonstrations, but it is youngsters with this some sort of imagined sense of democracy, which they cannot explain themselves.
So explain to us then, when Beijing talks about one country, two systems, what does that mean then? Doesn't that create the impression that certain parts of the country get special privileges and they want to continue to enjoy those?
The privileges that the Hong Kongese have, I think it was the teething problem of Hong Kong as it comes back into China. Because we had one social system in China, which is full of patriotism and all that, and we had one system that was lived under the British colony in Hong Kong. So the question of two systems, one country, it was to ease in the Hong Kong society into China. Ironically, it was exactly to avoid the sort of polemics that we see now. And you must remember that China has got a blueprint nationally, and that blueprint now expands itself to the entire world. So it will be ironic that China will allow one province to change the whole paradigm and say that China, because what Hong Kongese are saying, at least those that are demonstrating, that it is that China as a whole has to adopt the Western governance system, which is impossible. There's another dimension that I should mention here also. The dimension that during the fall of the Qing dynasty, which was the last imperial state in China, last imperial government, China went through humiliation by Western country, where China was separated into small pieces until the fall of the Qing dynasty. Now, what we see a China rising and again facing very similar enemies or very similar anti-forces trying to curb China's development for its own society. Let's remember that China has already freed 700 million people from poverty into middle class.
So,
that
Prof,
has never been unprecedented in the world.
So, Prof, are you suggesting that there are external influences in this, can I call it a conflict that's playing out at the moment?
The global tendency now of moving into one's own lager, that one might explain it like that.
All right.
The youngsters in Hong Kong, they aspire to live like people in the West. They see as if it is, or they interpret the Chinese system as if it is oppression. But the irony is that, and the reason why China is leaving this thing to go on like this, we see patriotic youth from mainland China now trying to understand that, okay, if you don't have a fully fledged identity, which is the issue actually with Hong Kong, Hong Kongese are transitioning from a Western foreign system into the Chinese system. I've mentioned this before, that these are growing pains of the Hong Kong society, which is part and parcel of China. They have some sort of imagined society, which then they tend to try to divorce themselves from mainland China. And remember that this young generation we're talking about, they've not suffered poverty, so they are not able to reflect the benefits of unity and the benefits of poverty elimination and the benefits of scientific advances that are being brought by China into the entire region.
All right. Perhaps in conclusion, we're seeing that this, as you said, this round of protests have gone on longer than ever before. We're seeing the authorities using live ammunition this time around. And also we're seeing the announcement of these emergency regulations that haven't been used for 50 years, banning face masks, likely to come into play on Friday. This is all pointing towards what could be quite a serious and perhaps tragic end.
I'm not a pessimist. I don't see a tragic end here because many analysts from the West, from Yale, from Harvard, from USA itself, many people are surprised that the central government in China has just played a low key. And remember also that the Carrie Lam extradition bill did not come from the mainland. It was from the legislature of Hong Kong itself. That's number one. And number two, the bill that is coming on now for removing the mask, it's an internal issue in Hong Kong. It is not commanded or dictated from Beijing. So until now, I still don't find a reason of saying that Beijing is pressing which buttons in order for what to happen. What we should commend is that Beijing has taken a stance of a hands-off. On how long the hands-off stance will take, let me give you a scenario. If we are going to move a little bit to a pessimistic scenario. Hong Kong is a duty-free country. They gain a lot of money by mainland Chinese going to Hong Kong to buy goods. And Hong Kong has got freedoms that they can go freely to mainland. Whilst mainlanders, they need a special permit to move to Hong Kong. So I hear many people talking about police or military going to move to Hong Kong. That is not going to happen. All China needs to do is just to open the Shenzhen border. And within 1 hour, we wouldn't have Hong Kong. Because it means the entire population of Shenzhen will just move freely into Hong Kong. And the Chinese government has seen to it that it preserves Hong Kong as a financial capital of the region, and it has done a lot to sustain that position of Hong Kong. Hong Kong, I will say, it has so far undermined itself, or the section of the people of Hong Kong that are demonstrating. They are undermining themselves.
All right, Prof, I wish we had so much more time to discuss this, but perhaps we can follow up again with another conversation, perhaps early next week. Thanks so much indeed for your insights this day. Thanks so much. All right, that was Professor Paul Tembe, who's senior researcher at the Thabo Mbeki African Leadership Institute, giving us his insights on a region he knows well, lived there for many, many years, and fluent in Mandarin as well, able to give us some nuances on the situation that's playing out in Hong Kong at the moment.